So thanks so much to James for the invitation. My day job is not related to this necessarily. I'm a research fellow at the University of Aberdeen studying basically NHS records to help improve public health. My sort of evening job is I'm basically obsessed with research culture and open science and how we can improve the science that we do. So I'm the Aberdeen lead for the UK Reproducibility Network that I'll talk about a bit. I love to chat about this, particularly on Twitter. I think Twitter can be troublesome, but research culture Twitter is excellent. So I highly recommend joining if you have any sort of interest in research integrity and things like that. And the slides I'm presenting today are here. I've posted them online just now. So the Open Science Foundation website right there, in case you want to follow along. And all my slides are free to use there. So I'm taking research integrity as about integrity of the research, less about integrity of the researcher. So I would like the research we put into the world to be true and reliable. And this is perhaps a slightly more controversial take than you might expect. So I have a few slides where I'm hoping to prove to you that we do have a problem with research quality. And I think it might be worse than we expect. And I do not think it's because of fraud. Even though fraud stories, I even find them fun to follow, I do not think bad actors are at all the main reason we have a problem with the quality of the scientific record. So the most flamboyantly named article that often comes up in talks like mine is John Ioannidis, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. So worth a read, 15 years old now, and you see almost 3 million reads here. People are interested in this and thinking about it. There's also a nice collection broadly called On Research Waste, which I think sometimes might be a nicer framing for it. So if our scientific results are not reliable, that research has been wasted. So thinking about it as wasting taxpayer money, patient time, things like that. And there's been several popular press collections. This is a nice one I can recommend from The Economist from 2013, talking about problems with reliability in the scientific record. If you do like fraud, so there's a couple of people on Twitter that are worth following. Elizabeth Bick is a hero for finding inaccurate images in particular in records. She has an eye for picking up these sort of duplications. I put a very basic one here on the slide. She tweets under Microm Digest. And a pair of journalists have started a website that actually is what got me interested in this to begin with, called Retraction Watch. And all they do is talk about papers that have been retracted recently and why. They keep a retraction leaderboard for people who've had the most papers pulled. And I'll talk about why I think that's interesting, worth tracking, but I hope that we don't take removal of papers due to errors as putting you on a naughty board generally. So there's certainly egregious cases, but there's probably a million trivial cases where papers ought to have been retracted because they're just not true. So for this slide, so I should say, you might notice, I have a bias towards science, so I can speak clearly to sort of hypothesis-driven scientific research, so my apologies for the focus there. But if you take your field of choice and pop it into Google with reproducibility crisis afterwards, you can get as many papers as you like. So if you run a pharma company and you would like to make some drugs and you read the literature and you go try to focus on drug targets based on the papers you're reading, you'll find most of them aren't true. You can't reproduce this research. It's true across medicine. I've chosen artificial intelligence here in neuroscience. Quote of the day from an observational study survey is, any claim coming from an observational study is most likely to be wrong. So don't worry about vitamin D and COVID just now. I'm just trying to sort of overwhelm you without going into the weeds here, that this is a problem broadly, that big swaths of the scientific literature aren't reliable. Two great recent, very readable nonfiction pop science books. Rigor Mortis, I can highly recommend, walks through the details here, and Stuart Ritchie also, I think that just came out last year, both great reads. So they walk through the problems and at the end some solutions, which I'll try to get to here in the second half of my talk. So if you follow along with me here. Let's assume the scientific record has a problem, that there are unreliable results in there. Why? So, and I mentioned I am interested in open science and learned a lot of the best practices that they've mentioned in some of the talks here and tried to implement them myself. I love credit authorship and things like that. But after getting into the details there, I realized one of the big problems is we are not rewarded for working this way. And in fact, the ways we are rewarded often punish us if we work this way. So I've switched my focus now to thinking about how we can improve that. So some evidence about why actually comes from James and UKRI's great work. So he briefly showed a slide on this, a study, it just came out last year. Tons of stakeholders interested in research integrity, so researchers, but also funders and people who publish journals, got together to try to figure out why the scientific record wasn't as reliable as we'd hoped. And there you can see UKRI, Britain's biggest funder, and the UK Reproducibility Network logos that I mentioned before. So I'll just talk about, from this publication, the top 5 reasons stakeholders gave for why there was poor quality research, bad research, poor research integrity here. These are the top 5. Workloads for researchers, promotion criteria used to say whether or not you're doing your researcher job well. Metrics, so how do you measure whether someone's doing their job well? Things like impact factor that's associated with the journal. League tables, how's your institute doing? How's your university doing? What metrics are used there? And bullying and harassment. I think it's worth thinking about this. I almost think like if we all just sat here quietly and thought about this for 20 minutes, it's interesting. And for me, these are wildly different reasons. So bullying and harassment should be a crime. So if you threaten anyone in your lab, if they don't work a certain immoral way, I think this is a problem that needs to be solved much like you would solve a crime, right? So detection and punishment, something like that. The other 4 are very, 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 very different. This is how we choose to design how we do research. And these are things I think that we can have a huge positive impact on and change the quality of the record. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit. And I think a lot, especially junior people, don't know much about how you get and keep an academic job. So I'm going to walk through it a bit. This is a table from the promotion documents from my university from 2018, and it gives you a sense of what gets rewarded in science here. So these are the 4 grades, pay grades of people who do research for a living. So 20% of your time on teaching and administration and 80% there on research. So you can see at this table, so this is success in teaching is just measured by hours. This last is how many PhDs you supervise. No real measure there besides bodies. Ref, 3 or 4 star papers published per ref cycle. So I'll talk about this a little bit, and the amount of money you win. So this is how you get and keep a job. It's worth saying that this is public, right? So it seems somewhat shameful when you look at it like this, but this is how it is set up in a quick view on a table. So I'm a senior postdoc. We are the engine of research. If you wonder how primary research functions across the world, it's people like me. So we're professional researchers that work at a university despite the kind of peculiar title. So I don't work at pharma, I work for a university. My post requires a PhD. By definition, almost, postdocs are term limited. So almost all of them are less than 3 years, some less than 1 year posts. You know when you sign the contract that you're redundant afterwards. So this is the entire duration of your post. So they start at grade 6 here at something like just under 34,000 pounds a year. So you take home about $2 grand a month. And about half of that would go to cost of living, I guess, maybe a bit more. So just rent. Can't buy a house if you're on a 1 or 2 year contract. And if you're moving, which you have to do for these types of jobs, you figure a visa fee for a researcher is about half a month's salary. So just think about that's who is coming in to do the research for the UK and how we're rewarding them. So we saw 1 day a week you do teaching and admin, and 4 days a week you do research. That sounds pretty good, right? We love research. So you have 4 days. Let's say we spend one of those days designing and supervising research projects for 2 PhDs. So this is what you need to do to get promoted and or to move to a permanent post here, grade 7. Now you must win at least £125,000 in grants. And at first, maybe you're like, oh, that's not too much, right? But you only get credit for your portion. So if you're a co-applicant with 6 other people, you need to do an awful lot of applications. So doing the math, the award rate for UKRI is a bit less than 25%. So you would need to plan your short-term, in a ref cycle, to apply for something like 8 grants to meet this bar, this lowest bar that you have to meet. And keep in mind that people without permanent posts are not allowed to apply for many types of grants. So if you can't apply to most charities if you don't already have a permanent post. So your field is pretty limited. So you have a lot of work to do in addition to supervising your PhDs for those 4 days a week, 8 grants in a cycle minimum. And imagine if you're a senior person. So I don't know if you noticed in that table, senior people have to get 5 times more money than someone at a grade 7. So maybe they have to plan to apply to 40 grants per ref cycle. This is a lot of work to earn your own salary and the salary of the researchers you hope to bring into your team. And we haven't talked about publications yet, which is, say, doing the actual research. So what's ref 3 or 4 star? So they expect someone like me to publish at least 4 papers that are world leading or internationally excellent. This is how you judge. 3 stars is internationally excellent. That's the wording from ref. 4 stars is world leading. And the 3 measures of quality for ref, according to their documentation, is originality, significance, and rigor. So 4 papers per 5 years that are world leading in originality, significance, and rigor. This is a big ask to do in maybe the 2 days per week you have left in your research time. The other sort of devastating thing is it actively discourages teamwork. So if you and a colleague in your institute are working together on a project, you don't both get credit for that paper because your institute can't submit it twice to ref. So that paper doesn't count for you. You give it to your friend for her submission. So again, always dividing these successes by the number of people on your team. So that was my depressing part of my talk. I am fundamentally optimistic that things are getting better, but I think it's important to sort of have your heart broken at first to think about the environment we're working on. So thinking about Irene's talk, I agree with her that it is unethical to add someone to a paper when they didn't do any work. But someone in the audience asked, could you give someone sort of an easy job so they get authorship? And when you see where the bar is and how, frankly, kind of ludicrous the bar is for speed and novelty, you realize, I don't know what kind of game we're playing. Am I going to go to hell for adding my colleague to a paper just so she keeps her job and can stay in the country? It gives us very tricky decisions to make that I think we shouldn't have to make. And this is that culture that I wound up starting to think about more. So I do think we can fix this. So this is the cheerful second half of the talk, and there's some very simple things we can do, and change is in the air, and not from people like me, right? From people who are running massive funders, see this problem, realize they're not getting their money's worth. They're paying all this money, and it is going into research that isn't reliable. It behooves them to change it as well. So I think from up above and down below, people are seeing the problems, and we just need to work together to sort of change the way we incentivize our work. So long story short, and I won't go into the weeds much here, we know how to improve research quality. There's training you can do, there's ways you can work that makes your research much more reliable. If I had to give one quick summary, so this paper and the references inside it, I think are a great place to start. It's from 2017, a manifesto for reproducible science from the first ever issue of Nature Human Behavior. Highly recommend it, worth reading. And to sum it up, one slide here on the best ways of working to make research more true. Decide what you're going to do ahead of time. Register your plans and stick to them. No fishing around for flashy findings. Use blinding, some members of the team, some parts of the data, things like that. Publish regardless of results. And so this is a pet peeve of mine. I hate when people say scientists don't publish negative results and we have a file drawer problem. We don't. If we got 3-star ref papers for publishing results where you did not find an effect, we would publish them. Journals don't publish null findings. And this is not our problem. And so all this important research isn't rewarded, isn't allowed to be published, sits in a file drawer. So we don't know that these depression drugs don't actually work. No one's published the findings. So yeah, sharing code and data so other people can check for problems, replicating studies, same sort of idea. We think this works. We should check it a couple times. Big one is normalizing retraction. There's a nice podcast with Dorothy Bishop on this just this week. Everything hurts. And rewarding teamwork is a big one for me. We need to work together. I asked a senior lecturer in statistics yesterday how he handles, we write code, computer programs to do our data analysis, and how he handles checking code, a couple thousand lines of code that need looking at. And he laughed. He said, we can't ask anyone to check our code. It's too time consuming. Right? So we should weep real tears when we hear that sort of thing. And he's a good scientist, but he knows he's harming his friends if he asks them to check his code. It's not a way to get reliable results. So I think if just to pause and imagine if we were rewarded, if that same table in the promotion criteria rewarded working this way, how different our science would be. And again, we know how to do this. You want a plane to fly safely, teamwork, checklists, double checking things by multiple people. So if we got points in promotion for working this way, reviewing papers, improving methods and theories, detecting errors, I think we would have more reliable science. So now the question is, can we change our culture to reward this way of working? And I think this is my Immanuel Kant, I'm married to a philosopher, so bear with me. He says, you can't oblige someone to do something they can't possibly do. And so I get a bit grumpy. So you can't ask us to work openly and check thousands of lines of code if it actually might damage our career and mean we can't get a mortgage or stay in the country. This is where the standards are, this potentially very dangerous outcomes for working this way for people. And so now you think, Butler, come on. We have to change the whole research culture. And so I have a few small things that I think I have found incredibly helpful in the past 18 months for changing research culture where I work. I do think junior people can lead, and I think it amounts to passing information from the powerful way up above, things like funders, to the people at our university who are making decisions. And you can do it in a very friendly way. Doesn't need to be threatening or negative. Make small positive suggestions for change. So yeah, I do think people, especially like the senior management team at your university, are sympathetic and don't know where to start. Research integrity and research culture can mean 1,000 things to them, and they genuinely don't know where their effort is best placed. So for us, I'm speaking now to early career researchers or perhaps people who consider themselves junior, I think it's important just to get familiar with how your university works and how funders want to improve research culture, find peer support, the other good people, and pass these solutions around. This sounds boring, but I've found this to be a really successful way to get about making change. If I had to start anywhere, I would start with the work Wellcome Trust is doing. They're really avant-garde and they're implementing it. So I think several people have shown results from a survey they did of 4,000 researchers that show how broken the culture is. So if you need to make a case locally, you don't need to do a survey. Show the slides, show the figures from this Wellcome Trust survey, and then follow their research culture change that they're implementing. So they have a great website, just on their website, they talk about what they're doing. And I'll have a couple slides on what they're supporting. So this is things Wellcome mandates universities do. If Wellcome funds anyone employed there, they require that universities meet this standard. And one of the big things is the Declaration of Research Assessment, worth knowing. It says that universities can't judge your research by impact factors. And so universities sign this agreement, welcome mandates that they sign it and make it public on their website. So when you're going up for publication, they can't say a proxy for a ref score for you is the impact factor of your journal. I don't know if you noticed, but that rubric from my university said we had to have published papers to get promoted. And DORA now says there are other things besides publications that matter, like say writing software, and those have to be evaluated. The Concordat to support researchers says a couple of things, and many universities are signing this, which means you can hold them to it. They have to report on research culture, improve job security for researchers, and recognize all researchers' contributions. So this is worth keeping in mind. You don't need to sort of shout at anyone about this, but know this exists and whether your university did it. This is a big one that people don't talk about, and I don't know why. Everyone who applies to the UKRI, the biggest funder in the United Kingdom, the public science funder, the research funder, will have to submit shortly a CV that is not a list of their publications and grants. It's a narrative summary of what they've done on these 4 topics down here, including how you've improved the research community and supported other people. So this is well worth a find and worth formatting your CV to this standard now, because it's a paradigm shift in thinking about how we evaluate how good a researcher someone is. So get to know this, get yourself ready, and then let people you work with know it's coming as well. And this is more you can do locally. So you found out a little bit what's happening in the world, nationally. I think it's difficult for earlier career researchers to dig deep about how their university works, but I think it's time well spent. Things like ask, is there training for writing this kind of CV? And you send a link to the CV requirements. And the people at your university say, damn, I guess we should do that. It's critical. And just finding out whether your university has signed things like this. And if they haven't, perhaps figuring out whether their nearest rival university has. Get to know promotion criteria is all I can recommend. And that's things you can ask for. Find out how rigor for research is assessed and who does these things, what committees. You can just keep this in your pocket. You don't need to act, but it's useful information to have. And the other thing I like to do, I think of it as finding the good people, but anyone who's interested in improving research culture, I have found are delightful. And it's important to find them where you work and then where else they are in your field at other universities. So be a tiny bit visible so they can see who you are at a glance. University website's a good place to start. I really love Twitter. As I said before, you can mute all political words and just follow the science of your choice. 3 things I recommend following. You don't need to be active, but worth sort of following along with. There's the UK Reproducibility Network. You can start a local chapter if your uni doesn't have one. Reproducibility has a journal club and a kit for better understanding this reproducibility crisis. And the RIOT Science Club, there's several branches now, and I highly recommend their YouTube channel. If you want to sort of drink in what sort of changes are coming and what other folks are doing, it's a great place to start. And then here's where a tiny bit of junior power comes in. Find these things out and pass it upwards. It might be the head of your lab, it might be the head of your institute, maybe it's further up. So retweet how your rival university is rewarding research assessment. Let other folks know how it's happening in other places. Send emails, have coffees, just sort of start the conversation here and let people know what else is happening. I found that's a great way to get the conversation going. And it naturally leads to, what could we do here? And I think that's a great way to make these changes. In addition to following along with those groups I mentioned before, you can start one. The bar is low for some of these. I started a UKRN group here with just a few peers, 2 years ago, maybe now. We have something like 50 people who join the meetings now. So there is a lot of appetite, especially at the junior level for this. And it's great to show that locally. And finally, once you think you might have enough ammunition, maybe not the most peaceful metaphor, but enough in your arsenal to go out and sort of think about making local changes, ask to join committees. Part of that researcher Concordat is to include people on precarious contracts at the university level on things like curriculum development, research strategy committees. And you don't have to say a lot. You can make 1 or 2 points. I hear University X is doing it like this. And I do find it does make change. People are sympathetic, just overwhelmed. And if you can point them at a simple solution that might work fairly quickly, they might just snatch it up. So I think I'm wrapping up here. So yeah, I don't think we need research integrity police to find fraudsters. I think we need something that's much more like public health. So we don't want to catch criminals. We want to sort of encourage people to behave in a healthy way from the beginning and reward it. And I think that's a better way to improve global research culture. Oh, another thing I can recommend, a recent article by Marcus Munafo, same one who wrote that 2017 paper, led that team, that raising research quality requires collective action. So that's a good overview. And I'm going to skim by this slide. If you want a few more things to watch quickly, you can watch Science Minister talking about how we have to reform REF ASAP, and the head of UKRI saying basically the same thing about research culture. So there's a bunch of good resources here in my slides. And these are, you know, if you're consuming some media while you go for a walk, these are places I recommend following here that I mentioned briefly. So that's me, that's the end here, and thanks very much.
Jessica, thank you so much. That was fascinating. It's always good to hear overviews of the problems that people are facing, but also the fact that, as you say, there is hope. There's not a policing approach. There is change that we can all affect and implement ourselves, as well as recognizing that we're not going through this alone, and there are other resources that we can draw on. So I've had a load of questions come in. Okay. Many people, junior people who work on research culture, are being actively warned they're not in the appropriate level to bring about change. This is from one of our questions saying that it's sort of work on research culture can sometimes be seen as an opportunity to get sort of promotion and resources by senior people, and junior people are sort of squeezed out. So in some ways, the culture around it, changing research culture, can be wrong. How can we change this?
That's a tricky one. I do agree, once university management sees it as an important thing to pay attention to, they will give power to implement change to a dean who will go off and work with this. So the UKRN has a great solution, I think, so that they've already implemented at sites where the university has signed on to join the UKRN. They commit 10% of someone very senior's time to questions around research integrity and research culture. And they support a local lead, someone like me, who's very junior, and we're actually independent. So I don't report to the senior person, we're there to work together. So highly recommend, so that's where you say, ooh, best practice as recommended by the UK Reproducibility Network is to do something like this. And you petition. Mind, they don't pay me anything. I don't even get a fraction of my time allotted to it. That's something I'm working to try to change. The senior person gets a budget and 10% of their time allotted, and junior person doesn't get anything. But we're working on it.
Yeah, I think giving people time and space and where necessary funds to make change is really important, because even the research integrity people working in universities centrally on these issues are low in number, and their budgets aren't very good at all. Okay, what else have we got? We are generally discouraged from conducting repeat studies, yet as you've highlighted, reproducibility is a major problem in research. How can we engage with funders, institutes and publishers to change this, as the ability to show the same finding in a different experimental setting is surely key to improving research outputs?
Yeah, so this is you've got at the heart of the problem. So we are not meant to reproduce studies. We are not meant to check code. We are not meant to, a million of those things that I said would improve research, we're actively discouraged from doing. And so there's not a silver bullet. There really isn't, unfortunately. And I do think it's going to be like a generation of steering the ship in one direction, and that will hurt the career of people who don't have permanent posts. So one of the things I do think it's important of saying is put your own mask on first, right? So take care of yourself, do what you have to do to pay your mortgage, keep your family safe. And then if you have time and the privilege of time, you can work on changing that culture there. But the steps I showed you are tiny. It's quite literally letting the head of your lab know that Wellcome is changing the way they measure some of this research assessment, and it's important. Oh, UKRI is changing CVs. What can we do to make our CVs look better by this metric? Oh, maybe the university could give us a prize for open data. Do you know? So these are tiny things, and they're not going to save someone's career in the next 18 months, which is, let's just acknowledge, depressing.
No, I think the idea of making small incremental changes is very important, because otherwise these, as you say, are long-term issues, and it can seem quite daunting. You know, we're trying to change the fabric of research, but actually we make up that fabric of research and we can affect change. I think some of the changes you mentioned by the funders have come about because of lobbying by researchers. Okay, we had a lot of comments. A couple of comments out from anonymous about negative results. People note that negative results are as important, if not more important, than positive results. Now, journals want to publish, a comment goes, journals want to publish things that get cited because that's a source of brand value for them. Do papers that report null or negative findings get cited? Are they considered an attractive prospect by journals, do you think?
So I'm going to take this chance. I am an evangelist for registered reports. You need to do registered reports. Like, if all you do right now is Google the phrase registered reports, this is a new way of publishing. Something like 300 journals now work this way. You submit to the journal your research plan before you collect any data. You get peer review on the research plan, and the paper gets accepted before you do the research. The journal legally commits to publishing your paper if you meet your own research plan, regardless of whether the results are positive or negative. I did one, it changed my life. It's just the way we have to go forward. And if you follow Chris Chambers on Twitter, he just announced a new way of doing it where you get peer-reviewed research plan, you get pre-accepted to 15 journals. You get to choose which one you publish at, or none at all if you prefer, if it's a Nature type result. So now the burden then is the junior person has to convince all of their colleagues they need to write a registered report, which is a battle I have recently lost. Published one and it was great, and I couldn't convince my next team that we should publish that way. But if you can, registered reports to get those results out there. No, it's proven that papers with negative results don't get cited as often, even for incredibly important things like drug discovery. And that's, I think, a huge part of the problem is the way for-profit publishing works. Yeah. And if we changed that, a lot of the incentives would change. So that's a talk for another day, how we should dismantle for-profit publishing.
Absolutely. I think that the elements of the system all need to, I've heard publishers who equally said when they've run journals that specialize in negative studies, researchers didn't want to submit to them. I think we need, the challenge with culture, we need to change from almost every aspect of it needs to start beginning to change simultaneously.
But let's recognize that people are doing it. So senior people are tirelessly working to give us these slivers of opportunity to do better science.
Yeah. Okay, a question from Kate. What keeps you optimistic in the face of all these cultural barriers that we're fighting, that you're trying to change? What keeps you going?
Sadly, I think it's kind of genetic. I'm kind of daffy and optimistic by nature. No, I do. So I think if I didn't see any support from senior people and funders and people with real power, I would have changed fields long ago. Go make money and code for Facebook, right? So if I didn't think there was a possibility for change, I would be long gone. So I think follow along with some of the people working on research culture from Wellcome, and it's inspiring. They're working incredibly hard to give us these opportunities. UKRI as well has a research culture team that is making change, not quite as loudly, but they're doing it. So yeah, if I didn't see people far more powerful than me working hard at it, I wouldn't be interested. The Reproducibility UKRN group, there's a whole bunch of lovely people working hard. It's tricky to be optimistic if you're on a 9 months left in your contract. That's a very different story. So let's acknowledge that as well. But I do think change is in the air.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay.